Hello and welcome to How to Econ. Let's take a look at supply and factors that affect supply. Supply is the amount of some good or service sellers or producers are willing to sell at each price. Quantity supplied is the total number of units of a good or service producers are willing to sell at a given price. The common notation for quantity supplied is QS. The table here shows an example of supply for gasoline. In this case, we are measuring price in dollars per gallon of gasoline. We measure the quantity supplied in millions of gallons over some time period, for example per day, and over some geographic area, for example a country like the United States. From the second line of the table, you see that when the gasoline price is $1 per gallon, American sellers are willing and able to sell 500 million gallons per day. Or you can say that at the price of $1 per gallon, the quantity supplied is 500 million gallons per day. When the gasoline price is $1.2 per gallon, American sellers are willing to sell 550 million gallons. Or we say that at the price of $1.2 per gallon, the quantity supplied is 550 million gallons. When the price goes all the way up to $2.2 per gallon of gasoline, American sellers are willing to sell 720 million gallons, or quantity supplied is 720 million gallons. So you can see that when the price level is high, quantity supplied is high, and when the price level is low, quantity supplied is low. We can show this relationship by using the table on the left, or we can use the graph of a supply curve on the right. These are two ways to present the relationship between price and quantity supplied. The supply graph has two axes. The vertical axis shows the price levels. The horizontal axis shows the quantity supplied. Each point on the supply curve is a combination of a given price and the quantity supplied at that price. For example, the highest point on the supply curve on this graph is associated with the highest price level on our supply table. At the highest point on the supply curve, the price is $2.2 per gallon of gasoline, and the quantity supplied is 720 million gallons. The lowest point on this supply curve is associated with the lowest price on our table. The price is $1 per gallon and the quantity supplied is 500 million gallons at the lowest point on the supply curve. Again, it is easy to see that when the price level is high, quantity supplied is high, and when the price level is low, quantity supplied is low. This is what we call the law of supply. Law of supply says that if price goes up, then quantity supplied goes up. If price goes down, then quantity supplied goes down. Assume that everything else stays the same, ceteris paribus. The supply curve is simply a graphic illustration of this relationship between price and quantity supplied. Supply curves will appear somewhat different for different products. They may appear relatively steep or flat, or they may be straight or curved. But most supply curves share the fundamental similarity that they slope up from left to right because they reflect the law of supply. Please pay attention that when the price of a product changes, it only affects quantity supplied, not supply. In economic terminology, supply is not the same as quantity supplied. When economists talk about supply, they mean the relationship between a range of prices and the quantity supplied at those prices, as illustrated by a supply curve or a supply table. The supply curve can be used to identify how much sellers would sell at any given price. When economists talk about quantity supplied, they mean only a certain point on the supply curve. For example, in this graph, point A on the supply curve shows how much sellers willing to sell at the price level P0. When the price increases from P0 to P1, the quantity supplied increases from Q0 to Q1. So we move from point A to point B on the supply curve. However, supply and the supply curve do not change in this example. In short, supply refers to the entire curve and quantity supplied refers to one point on the curve at a time. The supply curve can be used to demonstrate the minimum price a firm will accept to produce a given quantity of output. This price is based on the cost of production and the firm's desired profit. For example, at point A on the supply curve, a firm is producing the quantity level Q0, and the minimum price this firm would sell that quantity for is P0. This price P0 includes the production cost of producing Q0 units and the desired profit from those units. Because the price of a product must cover the cost of production, if the production costs change, the price for the product will change as well. For instance, if the cost of production increases, the price for the product will need to increase. On this graph, when the production costs increase, assume that the firm has the same desired profit. The price would need to increase from P0 to P1 in order to cover for the higher cost. So this firm shifts from point A to point B. Imagine that the production costs increase at every quantity level. Then the price must increase at every quantity level. That would lead to the whole supply curve shifts upward. The gap between the old supply curve and the new supply curve is the increase in the production cost. In economics, when a supply curve shifts upward, it can also be called shifting to the left to depict a decrease in supply. When supply increases, the supply curve shifts to the right. How far or how close the supply curve shifts depends on how big the shock is to the supply side. For instance, if the production cost increase 10 times, the supply curve will shift further away to the left than when the cost increase only 2 times. There are more factors that affect supply. Again, they are called supply shifters because they shift the supply curve on the graph. There are some economic factors other than price that cause a different quantity to be supplied at every price level. These supply shifters are natural conditions for production, input prices, technology, taxes and regulations, number of sellers, and expectation about the future. They can either increase or decrease supply for a good or service. Let me give you a few examples. First example, when the weather is nice, oranges are productive. The supply for oranges will increase. The supply curves for oranges will shift to the right. Remember that we assume everything else stays the same or ceteris paribus in all of our examples. Second example, assume that Russia and the OPEC decrease their oil production. That would lead to more expensive oil and gasoline for the US. Because a lot of our manufacturers use oil and gasoline in their production. Expensive oil and gasoline means higher production cost, or we say higher input price. This could make American manufacturers to produce less or even go out of business because they cannot afford the higher energy cost. As a result, the supply curves will shift to the left. Remember that inputs are the factors that firms use in their production process. Inputs include energy, labor, materials, and all other capitals that firms need to produce their products and services. Third example, technology. When the horizontal drilling technology, or fracking, was invented in the United States, it increased the natural gas production in the United States significantly. It helps the US become the biggest natural gas producer in the world. Fourth example, taxes and regulations. If the government had a more relaxed immigration policy, many foreigners would come to the United States looking for jobs. Supply for labor would increase. It could be easier and cheaper for firms to hire workers. This would eventually lead to a higher supply for many products and services in the United States. The supply curves for those products and services will shift to the right. I have another example about taxes and regulations. Tariffs are taxes on imported products. Tariffs are one of the barriers for international trade. When the government put higher tariffs on imported aluminum and steel, it became more difficult and expensive for American auto and machinery producers and construction companies to produce because they use a lot of imported aluminum and steel. Their supply will decrease and their supply curves will shift to the left. On the opposite direction, when the government reduces barriers for international trade and encourages foreign companies to sell foreign products to American consumers, it increases the competition and supply in the domestic markets. Last but not least, expectation. Just like consumers, sellers have their own expectation about the future. We see this clearly during the corona pandemic. Many sellers of masks and hand sanitizers expected that the pandemic could last for a long time in the United States. So they held on to their supply at the beginning of the pandemic and sold them at much higher price once the pandemic had widely spread in the United States. Of course, that might be considered unethical and illegal in many countries. Depends on how high the price surged. But that's the topic for another video. That's it for now. The key takeaway from this video is that supply curve shows the relationship between price and quantity supplied. When price increases, sellers want to sell more. Therefore, quantity supplied increases. When price decreases, sellers want to sell less. Some might even go out of business. Therefore, quantity supplied decreases. Keep in mind that when price of a product changes, only quantity supplied for that product changes. The supply itself will not be affected. There are 6 factors that affect supply. They are supply shifters. Remember, these supply shifters are not the price of a product. Here are 6 supply shifters. Number 1, natural condition for production. Number 2, input prices, including labor costs, energy costs, materials, and all other capital costs. Number 3, technology. Number 4, taxes and regulations. Number 5, number of sellers. Finally, number 6, expectation about the future. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope it was helpful. Leave me some comments and let me know how you are doing in your econ classes or what topics you want to see more tutorial videos. Take care and bye for now.